Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Jonny Coker. This week, we'll be looking at federal immigration policy. There's a humanitarian crisis at the U.S. Mexico border, and while there hasn't been major immigration reform in decades, there have been several policies implemented that affect how migrants apply for asylum in the United States. Joining me to talk about her research on this topic is NMSU's Dr. Bertha Bermúdez Tapia. Dr. Bermúdez Tapia, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
No, it's great to have you here. And I want to talk about your research, but first I want to talk about your beginnings. You moved from Mexico City to Matamoros when you were young. How did that affect your upbringing, moving from one of the largest cities in the world to this borderland community? How did that affect your outlook on life?
Oof, that was actually it was hard because I was a little kid. So when you live in Mexico City, you have everything. You have concerts, you have a very vivid public life, and then moving into a border city, but also like a city like Matamoros that is a very small city. There are almost, for example, no universities there. There are a couple of research centers, but not as big as you can see here in Juarez. So kind of like getting to that context as a kid, I remember asking my mom questions like, okay, Mom, so when we are going to go to, I don't know, listen to the symphonic? And she was like, there's no symphonic here, Bertha. But at the beginning, it was a little bit frustrated for a kid, but then I started seeing other very important aspects of my life. And also I think I was growing up and like kind of value different things, like for example, this idea of the third nation and like how when you live in the border, you are not that Mexican, but you are also not American, and you have this conjunction of like two cultures coming together. And I think that's something that really kind of changed who I was at a very early age. And today, I really embrace the idea of being fronteriza, or somebody who lives on the border.
I see. What year was it that you moved to Matamoros?
I moved to Matamoros in 1994.
1994. So that was kind of one of the first major events that affect militarization at the border was 9/11. So can you tell me a little bit about that time and how that happening in the U.S. affected border policy at the U.S. Mexico border, like the increase of security and, like I said, militarization of the border?
Yes, actually, even before 9/11, in 1994, we're going to see the first kind of policies that are going to try to move or push migrants into hostile terrains, or like trying to make their paths of migration through, like, for example, more people start going through the Sonoran Desert because like they just kind of reinforce some of the safer areas where people used to cross undocumentedly, and kind of pushing these people through these more complicated and hostile terrains. That was 1994. But then in 2001, when with the attacks of the Twin Towers, what we are going to see is that the U.S. government is going to change migration from being before the attacks of New York. Actually, like, immigration was not a matter of national security. What's a matter of population coming in and out. After this, with the terrorist attacks, they're going to change the entire system, and now we are going to be under kind of an exceptional rule that it's going to look at migration as a national security order. And according to the government at that point, that was going to be temporary. It was something that's going to last, I don't know, a few years until they figured it out safer ways to understand migration. But unfortunately, that didn't change. And what we are seeing is an increase in the militarization of the border. And also, not only the militarization of the U.S. border, but we are going to see something that we call the outsourcing of migration security, and is also forcing other countries, like for example Mexico, to militarize their southern border as well. So we are going to see that it's not only the northern border of Mexico or the south of the U.S. that is militarized, but also the southern Mexican border, and that increases the risk for migrants coming through the United States. And this is not going to kind of, what we are seeing right now is that this is not temporary anymore. Like, the number of National Guard that is being deployed on the border is increasing. Almost every month we see more and more National Guard presence on the border, and it's not only the militarization what we are seeing that is increasing, but also kind of changes on immigration policies that is making people coming into the United States harder and harder, with documents and without documents.
And how did that evolution in border policy, I want to talk about folks migrating, but first I want to ask about you personally. How did that affect you growing up in that border town between Brownsville and Matamoros, and how was your life affected by these changes in border policy?
I mean, the impacts are for locals rather than the impacts for migrants are kind of very, very different, no? But I think something that changed radically was, for example, when my mom was a child, she used to cross the border just to get milk out of a grocery store in the U.S. because that was the milk that they prefer in the family. And crossing the border was very easy, 5-10 minutes, not a big issue. We also used to have like a border crossing card that you get as a little kid, and then this border crossing card was supposed to it didn't have an expiration date. So, and if you get it as a little kid, it didn't have in biometrics. Mine says do not need biometrics because it's a baby. And they took away all these border crossing cards after 9/11, basically because it was not safe to cross with those cards anymore. And then we have to get all these new cards that have all these biometrics and all way more secure information to cross the border. And I mean, that was not the only part. The other part is the lines to cross the border because of the inspection get harder and harder. Now they were in 10 minutes, so you cannot go to just buy milk now. You really need to need a reason to go because the lines can go from 1 hour to, I don't know, I spent one time 7 hours in line waiting to cross the border. This is obviously on peak months like December, for example,
right.
But still it's...
And I assume that has a major impact both economically and socially in creating a barrier that wasn't there before. Now these two communities, Brownsville and Matamoros, feel more separate than ever, whereas before it was that type of, you can just very easily go across.
And there are multiple examples about that. So one that I like to use a lot is on February, we have this sisterhood celebration for the two cities, Matamoros and Brownsville, that is called the Charro Days. So, and it's been changing radically. I remember when I was a kid, the parade started in Brownsville, and then everybody kind of come with the parade, and the whole parade came all the way into Matamoros. And now there are two different parades, two different celebrations, because crossing the border is not as easy, but also a lot of people who now live in Brownsville are afraid to come to Matamoros, and it's just like not the celebration I grew up with. And I grew up with a celebration where you still needed to show your papers on the border during that day, but my grandma remembers that during the Charro days, there was kind of like an open bridge policy, and people weren't trying to just cross and stay in the United States. It was just for the celebration, and she always talked about that, and for me it was like, nice, that sounds like fiction, really. But if I think about how the Charro days were when I was younger, probably if I tell that to a little kid today, they will say, that's fiction, Bertha.
And you definitely see that type of, especially in the region we're in between El Paso and Juarez, that, what's the word? The fear of crossing into Mexico. And it's like, oh, it's very militarized, and it's a lot more difficult to get past than when my parents, went to New Mexico State University, and they would be able to go to Juarez and just hang out with their friends and stuff. Now there is this mindset that that's just something that's not necessarily too dangerous to do, but
but people believe that, so they stop coming. When I was a teenager as well, I remember during spring break, it was full of spring breakers, all the American young people who wanted to just have some fun, and they knew that they can drink legally alcohol at age 18 in Matamoros. So it was, I remember my mom was like, Bertha, you cannot go near these people because they are dangerous. And now it's kind of the opposite, right? Like they are not there anymore because they see us as danger.
I want to talk about migration, especially from Central America and Caribbean countries. How has, again, that militarization affected Matamoros? Because you've done research in these migrant camps in that area. So how have the evolution of those policies affected folks wanting to come to the United States, and what kind of positions have they been put in border towns in Mexico because of U.S. policy?
So more than militarization, I think what I noticed kind of like changed dramatically how like the dynamics in terms of migrants coming into the city and then leaving the city radically changed was it started in 2018 with a policy that is called metering. So basically, metering already existed before 2018, but only in Calexico, California, and it was kind of a pilot program. And so when you want to request asylum into the United States, I'm going to go back a little bit to explain metering. So basically, according to the 1951 Convention of Refugees, what you need to do is to just walk through the division line between Mexico and the United States, in this case, and you put one foot into U.S. soil, you raise your hands, and you said, I fear for my life, I need asylum. And that was the protocol before 2018. And then a CBP officer, that is a Customs and Border Protection officer, is going to direct an interview to you to see if your fear is real and credible. So after this interview, then they decide if you can stay in the country and apply for asylum or not. With what happened with metering is that now there is a cap of the number of people that can come into the line and ask and request the asylum per day. But it was kind of, it was very messy, the system, because the list of people or the number of people that can come in was not organized by the United States officers. They requested the asylum seekers to organize themselves and put their names in order, and to please do not stay on the port of entry. So it was kind of chaotic. But actually that policy kind of like didn't really after that policy, we didn't really see that many people on the streets and camp formations or anything, because migrants were like, okay, so if I cannot go through the port of entry, I can actually circumvent this, go through, for example, the Rio Grande, and then you do the same. In front of a border patrol officer, you said you need asylum, and the process should go on because you are on U.S. soil.
Okay.
So when the U.S. government realized that that was happening, they were like, no, okay, so this policy is not actually working. And it's when, in 2019, they implemented the migrant protection protocols. And the migrant protection protocols was actually what triggered the formation of these migrant camps, and kind of like started with this process of erasure of asylum. And basically, what the Migrant Protection Protocol did is, it's also called Remain in Mexico, and I'm saying that because it's way easier to explain. So basically, is you come into the United States, you request asylum, you said I need asylum, then you're gonna get a court date. But those court dates usually take, 6 months, 1 year to happen. And in the meantime, before the migrant protection protocols, you were able to stay in the United States with a sponsor who's gonna take care of you. Because during the first year of you applying for asylum, you cannot have a job legally in the United States. So you need a sponsor. But with the migrant protection protocols, you are not allowed to stay in the United States. Even if you have a sponsor, you need to remain in Mexico and stay in Mexico until you get your court date and you talk with a judge, and the judge decides if you can apply for asylum or not. If you qualify for asylum or not. But the issue here is that the assumption was that Mexico was going to provide with humanitarian aid and they were going to be safe. Those are the migrant protection protocols. But Mexico was not ready to do that, and also never really did it. And people were just on the streets. And that's when I was actually doing a different kind of research in Matamoros, also related to migration, but not to asylum. And it's when I started seeing all these people living on the streets, kind of like in the walk sides of the port of entry, and I was like, what's happening? We never seen this before. I remember seeing asylum seekers at the CBP offices, but never on the streets, and we were like, what's happening here? And we started just talking to migrants and like wondering why they were just living on the streets. And I'm talking about a majority of women and children, and very little children, ages 3, 4, 5-year-old kids. And at the same time, also people who were crossing and were like, this is wrong. They start bringing tents and food and provide some basic medical services for the kids and the families there. And kind of a camp start growing up there because of all these tents. But at the beginning, there was like probably in a tent that can feed, comfortably 3 people. If you go to a campsite, they were living, probably 10 to 12 people inside the tent.
Wow. And so I guess my next question is, in terms of your research and in terms of these migrant camps, how did the COVID-19 pandemic come in and affect them? Yeah,
well, actually, it's when things kind of like got a little worse. And I think a little is not what I said. Yeah, but it got, so there was this camp in Matamoros in this plaza in front of the port of entry that is the International Gate Bridge. And basically what happened with COVID is that first locals start to feel nervous about seeing all these people on the streets and like in these tents and camps, like what are they doing here? And remember that when COVID hit, we didn't have any information of actual real information, like how I can get COVID, how can I protect myself, and people were basically in panic. Mm-hmm. So by seeing all these people on the streets, they were like, what if they got COVID and like just spread it to the city, because the conditions that they are living are not safe. And so there was a lot of push from to the local Matamoros government to do something with these people, and they decided to move them from this plaza to a levee that is called El Bordo, and it's actually a levee that I play with my grandparents like when I was a little child, and I used to have very good memories of that place until it became this enormous migrant camp that at some point there were even like 5,000 people living there. And the reason they decided to move these people was not to give them like a safer place to stay, but I think it was more like, if you don't see them, because on the levee it's kind of an elevated area and then it goes down, it's like no, the locals are not seeing them anymore, so we're not going to have this pressure on like what to do with them.
And so in your research, I mean, these camps are obviously not a good place to be, dirty, not good drinking water in the area. What needs to be done in order, on the U.S. policy side and maybe even on the Mexico side, in order to help alleviate what's happening right now? Like, what should folks take away from this interview in terms of like what are the solutions to be had here?
Yes, so for example, I mean, some of the main problems the Matamoros camp and other camps on the border have are not clean water, no sanitation, no education for the kids, no medical services, no electricity, and violence was rampant there. So if you were going to do a binational agreement to have people wait into another country, I think the first thing that needs to happen is, okay, where we are going to place these people that they are going to be safe. Because let's remember that asylum seekers are fleeing their countries because of extreme violence. So this is people that is already suffering. They are not leaving their countries because they want to. They are living because they are afraid. And then you put them in a situation that may be worse for themselves, for their families, for their children. So my approach here is you really need to work on, okay, let's open some shelters for people to be safe. And that can be done because that actually happened with Ukrainian refugees when they arrived to Tijuana. There was, they opened a shelter exclusively for Ukrainian people. So if that is possible for them, why is not possible for people from Central America or the Caribbean?
Well, I guess my follow-up question is like, what's your answer to that? Like, why not?
I think there is a racial component on it, because what we are seeing in the numbers is that most of the people who are struggling to get access to asylum requests are mostly brown and black bodies. And that is one thing. The other aspect has to be with their nationalities. And like, I mean, there's a lot of politics involved in here. And right now, for example, helping Honduras does not going to put the United States in the same international recognition place that if you support somebody from Ukraine who's been in the war with Russia, for example.
I see. Well, we don't have a ton of time left with this interview. I know we've barely scratched the surface of your research and the problems that have presented themselves at the U.S. Mexico border over these last few years, but I wanted to give you a chance. You've been awarded the 2024 Emerging Scholars Award by New Mexico State University's College of Health Education and Social Transformation, and through that you're collaborating with undergraduate students on research projects at the U.S. Mexico border. So I want to give you a chance to plug that and tell us a little bit about that and what you hope to get out of that.
Yes, I'm working with two students, Hope Armijo and Marian Galabis, and we are right now putting together a paper that talks about survival strategies that particularly women implemented by living in the camps. So very briefly, what happened was that at the beginning, they were relying almost exclusively from humanitarian aid. So all the food that they received was already cooked, but they were not used to the cooking and the ingredients, etc. And there was a lot of people getting sick because of the food they were receiving, mostly like stomach bloat and stuff like that. So women start working together to build their own kitchens. Mm-hmm. And they started digging holes on the ground to put some firewood there and start cooking there. And then they were like, okay, no, it's kind of hard to cook like this. So what if we just start putting those ovens kind of elevated until by the end of the second year of their living in the camp, I saw like very polished, amazing kitchens that I was like, what's happening here? And I asked them like, how you kind of build this kitchen or why? And they were like, well, I don't know for how long I'm gonna be here. And my kids and I, we deserve to live with dignity. And this kitchen is giving us that chance and that hope of kind of a better living.
I see.
So we are writing a paper about that, these dignity kitchens.
Very good. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but Dr. Bermúdez Tapia, I really appreciate you coming in and telling us your story, and we'll have to get you in again because, like I said, we barely scratched the surface for this, so thank you again for coming on today.
Thank you very much.
That's all for today's episode. Remember, you can stay up to date on the latest local news at krwg.org. For everyone here at KRWG Public Media, I'm Jonny Coker, and we'll see you next time on Fronteras, A Changing America.